Hey everybody, KMO here with another Out of My Head video. And I'm going to start off with some feedback from Donald, who writes, "The audio on your videos is difficult to listen to at times. It is often very sibilant and piercing. Your black snowball microphone sounds infinitely better by comparison." This is a bummer for me to hear because one, I need to keep these videos manageable in terms of how long it takes me to make them. And two, because the stuff that I'm capturing just with the phone sounds better to me than the stuff that I am capturing with the black snowball. And I think maybe it has to do with the degradation of my own hearing. But the stuff from the snowball, which is what you're hearing right now, to me it sounds muffled and really kind of flat. Whereas I'm more able to pick up the high range stuff in what I'm just capturing straight through the phone with the Rode plug-in microphone. That's a bummer. But to illustrate, so this is straight from the phone. She sells seashells by the seashore. So if sibilance is a problem, that phrase will be ear-splitting. Here it is again with the snowball. She sells seashells by the seashore. Which one do you like better? Anyway, that's not what this video is about. This video is about a book that I've been reading, and it's called The Absent Superpower. The full title of it is, written on the whiteboard, The Shale Revolution and a World Without America by Peter Zeihan. And I started investigating Peter Zeihan because of comments that people left to these videos. And thank you very much for that pointer. I'm really enjoying this audiobook. The premise of the audiobook, or it's a book as well, is that the United States basically in 1944, after near the end anyway of World War II, it created what was the Bretton Woods Agreement, which took apart the old European colonial system and created an international framework for making shipping safe. Prior to that, you had to have your own colonies and you had to protect your own ships that you were sending to and from your colonies to get your raw materials because it just wasn't safe otherwise. I mean, if you sent out cargo vessels, on trade missions without protection, you're quite likely to lose your shirt. And the United States created this system and enforces it with the world's largest, most powerful navy, but we don't really take advantage of it ourselves so much, according to Peter Zeihan. And it wouldn't really hurt us all that much to withdraw from the international stage and be a much more self-sufficient sort of nation. We have enormous natural resources. We have technical expertise. We have a pretty good, knowledgeable, well-educated, well-disciplined workforce. And we don't need the world as much as the world needs us. And his premise for the book is that the U.S. is going to withdraw from the world stage. That's the part of the book that either I was not tuned in very well for that part, or maybe it's underdeveloped, but I don't really understand why he says the U.S. is going to do this if, it hasn't been in the interest of the United States to maintain, the safety of international trade for, more than half a century. Why would we withdraw from it now? That part I'm unclear on. Maybe somebody can help me out with that. But the first part of the book is all about shale drilling and the implications of it. The technology has come a long way in the last 20 years. It's come a long way in the last 5 years, really. And an important distinction or an important thing to understand is that, yes, we are extracting a lot of oil from shale formations, which, prior to the development of horizontal drilling and, slick water hydrofracturing from long laterals, as they say, before the development of that technology, the maturation of that technology, most petroleum, which is to say, hydrocarbons in the ground, long molecular chains of hydrogen and carbon atoms, they were inaccessible. The only parts that we could really get at what's known as conventional oil, and this isn't Peter Zahn saying this is my summation or condensed way of describing it. What we used to call conventional oil basically is oil that was accessible with 19th century technology. Shale technology 21st century shale technology is accessing huge new supplies, not just of oil, though, but also of natural gas, which is very pure in that it doesn't have a lot of sulfur or a lot of other contaminants in it. It is mostly just hydrogen and carbon. And natural gas doesn't have the same energy density as oil, and it's not nearly as easy to transport and store. Oil, crude oil, you can basically pour into a cup, and it'll just sit there. Natural gas, as the name implies, is a gas. It takes, you have to contain it. And it's not nearly as energy dense, so it's not as economical or as profitable or as practical to store it for later use. Basically, once you access it, you want to put it to use pretty quickly. And very few countries in the world have the infrastructure to utilize natural gas as soon as it is extracted or produced, as they say in the industry. So I'm not going to dwell on this part. I just want to show you one picture. This isn't from the book. I just Googled this and found this. So this is Texas, and you can see, globs of light that are cities. And I think I can't see the image right now. I'm describing it from memory, but I think San Antonio is in this image. But you also see, a big shale play. I think it's the Eagle Ford play. And you can see this sort of archipelago of light. And what that is the petroleum producers, the frackers in that area, they're drilling for oil, but they're also getting lots of natural gas at the same time, and they don't have the infrastructure in place to capture it and ship it someplace, so they just flare it. They just set it on fire, basically, and this is energy going to waste. But, the United States has got the lion's share of technical expertise for fracking technology, petroleum engineering technology, and the infrastructure to make use of shale gas. Very few other countries even compare to the United States in their ability to take advantage of this resource, which I think is one of the reasons why Peter Zeihan is saying that the U.S. is really in a good position to withdraw from the international stage, withdraw from support of a lot of its commitments, military commitments, alliances and whatnot, and basically go it alone as a self-sufficient actor going forward into the 21st century. And so that's the first part of the book. And he even says in the first part of the book, if you're not interested in this technical stuff, skip it. Go to section 2. Because in the later sections, the book totally transforms into basically 3 Tom Clancy novels without, the trappings of fiction. He's basically describing 3 scenarios for future conflicts. The first one he describes as the Twilight War, and this is Russia. The Russian people have basically stopped breeding. Their army is disintegrating from attrition, basically. They have a lot of military hardware, they have a lot of military expertise, but they don't have a lot of Russians, to draft into the military. And that demographic trend is looking really bleak for Russia. And Russia, its borders don't make a lot of sense. It's just sitting on this flat plain without mountains or waterways or other natural barriers to prevent other powers from invading. This has always been the case for Russia, and they're really paranoid about it. They've got this deep-seated, centuries-old cultural and national paranoia about being invaded. Thank you, Mongols, and and thank you, Nazi Germany. But it would be much easier for them to defend the borders of the old Soviet Union than it is to defend the borders of just Russia. It's a longer border if it's just Russia. I mean, it's kind of counterintuitive until you really look at the map. But if Russia were to expand to the old Soviet footprint, it would have a shorter border to defend, and a lot of its borders would be mountainous and would be defined by coastlines and such. So that's easier to defend. So they have a strong motivation to expand out and basically recapture the old Soviet Union, at least to their west. And they're starting with Ukraine, and they're doing it piecemeal. And they're doing it in small enough chunks so that it doesn't provoke a unified response from Europe or draw the United States into a conflict. And the United States, Russia has nuclear weapons. They have a nuclear arsenal with the capability to deliver intercontinental ballistic missiles to the American heartland. We are in no hurry to get into a shooting war, a direct war with Russia. And we're likely to put up with them doing, a lot of mischief in Europe, particularly in Scandinavia, and never get involved. So the first of these three conflicts that he describes is, how he thinks that the Scandinavian powers and the UK and the rest of Europe are going to respond to this incremental, retaking of territory by Russia. The next one, what does he call it? He calls it the next Gulf War. And it is the inevitable, in his view, conflict, open military conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And boy, I learned a lot about geopolitics of the region there. If you're listening to the audiobook, it is absolutely essential that you have a tablet or a computer or something open and you're looking at, Google Maps or some other map program. Because unless you have a really crisp, visualization ability and a very thorough knowledge of the geography of that region, you're going to learn stuff. I mean, you'll learn a lot more looking at the map and listening to the narration than you will just listening to the narration, which is what I spent a good part of yesterday doing. And I won't even try to encapsulate that, other than to say he makes a strong case. And, I knew going into it that the hatred that any Arab nation or any Islamic nation feels for the West is nothing compared to the hatred between Shia Muslims and Sunni Muslims. And that's basically what's going to drive this conflict. The final one he calls the tanker war. And in particular, he's talking about the oil needs of East Asian countries, particularly China, Korea, and Japan. And Japan is the absolute worst in terms of failing to reproduce themselves. Their economy has been stagnant for a very long time. Adult children are still living with their parents in amazing numbers, and their birth rate is down to like 1.4 births per woman, which is far lower than replacement rate. So one of the sort of intuition pumps that he throws out is that in Japan, they sell more adult diapers than they do baby diapers. The population is getting old. And they have to import all of their fossil fuels. All of them. They have no, at-home natural gas or oil production, or even coal, really, for that matter. They have to import everything. But they have a huge jump on anybody else, including China, in terms of naval power. And they are positioned such that really, to be vulnerable, you'd have to hit them from the east, which is just open ocean. And nobody has the naval capability to do that, except maybe the United States. And why would we? Particularly if Japan and the U.S. are like this, have been since the end of World War II. It is our closest, most unshakable ally, with the possible exception of the UK. But, he doesn't even talk about the possibility of a conflict between the U.S. and Japan. He's mostly talking about a contest between China and Japan, for resources, for shipping lanes, for access to fossil fuels. And I haven't finished that section yet. But it's fascinating. I lived in Japan twice, so it's of particular interest to me. And that's, I guess, where I will stop summarizing the contents of the book and just say that the one thing that he hasn't mentioned, it's a cluster of things, and it's a cluster of things that I talk about all the time: artificial intelligence, automation, and I don't talk about this so much, but it's certainly in a basket with those other two: cybersecurity and cyber warfare. He's talking about border security, conventional military, the threat of nuclear conflict, and access to hydrocarbons, access to petroleum. And he hasn't mentioned AI, he hasn't mentioned automation, he hasn't mentioned cyber attacks or cyber warfare. So maybe he will, maybe he won't. Even if he doesn't, this book is fascinating. No single book is going to cover everything that is relevant, but this one's really fascinating. So thanks to everybody who mentioned Peter Zeihan, I think it's pronounced, in the comments. All right, that is all. I will talk to you again tomorrow.